Good evening, everyone. I am Dhruv Sanjanwala
Go
and
on.
I am here to interview Professor Anirudh Pandit on behalf of the Bombay Technologists. I feel really privileged that I have been given the opportunity to interview someone who is considered as an idol in the field of chemistry and chemical engineering. Professor Anirudh Pandit is the Vice Chancellor of the Institute of Chemical Technology and a member of the Board of Governors of IIT Bombay and the Heavy Water Board of Department of Atomic Energy. Professor Pandit completed his BTech in chemistry from IIT BHU in 1980 and earned his PhD in chemical engineering from UDCity, now ICT, in 1984. He worked as a research associate with Professor J. F. Davidson at the University of Cambridge from 1984 to 1990. On returning to India, he joined ICT as a research scientist and was subsequently promoted to the position of a professor. His research interests include cavitation, sonochemistry, ballast water treatment, mixing in mechanically agitated contactors, modeling of stoves, use of non-conventional energy, and biotechnology. Professor Pandit has avidly authored over 400 publications, 5 books, and over 13 chapters, and has been cited over a whopping 26,000 times. He has 16 patents under his name and is on the editorial board of 5 international scientific journals. Professor Pandit believes in using applied research to solve problems pertinent to the Indian society. He has developed a modification of the traditional hand pump that uses hydrodynamic cavitation to produce potable water. The same technology is also being used throughout India to clean several lakes. He has also developed a highly efficient solid fuel burning stove, which leads to lesser wastage of fuel. So, let us ask a few questions to Professor Pandit about his research interests, opinions, and some advice. Sir, what motivated you to pursue chemical engineering as a specialization? And after completing your education, why did you opt to enter the academia rather than the industry?
Let me first correct myself. I didn't do BTech in chemistry. I did BTech in chemical engineering and also PhD in chemical engineering. So that way, my chemistry is much poorer as compared to the people who have done BTech in chemistry and chemical engineering. But apart from that corrections, let me get back to the question which you asked. I did chemical engineering because my father was a chemist himself. He had done his master's MSc in 1940s in chemistry, and he used to ask me about it. I don't really see the utility of the chemistry, where the chemistry lies. And he was the one who pushed me into chemical engineering at that point of time because he wanted to see how chemistry can be put to use using engineering principles. So one of the major reasons for me to get into chemical engineering was due to my father's background and my father's push. Secondly, why I wanted to enter academia, there are two specific reasons for that. My entire family, from mother's side, everybody come from an academia. My father was a teacher, my mother was a teacher, my grandmother was a teacher, my grandfather was a teacher. As a result of which, the teaching and academia is in genes. So to get into academia, a PhD is mandatory. My father couldn't do PhD because of some conditions, but he used to even guide PhD at those time in those period. So as a result of my father's push and my father's desire and my liking for teaching, I decided to pursue academia. And those who want to get into academia, PhD is a must. So I decided to do PhD.
Thank you, sir. That was really inspiring, sir. And, sir, you have worked extensively on hydrodynamic cavitation. Can you explain the simplified concept between hydrodynamic cavitation and give some applications of it?
Yeah, sure. Now, to answer this specific question, I must tell you a history of hydrodynamic cavitation. When I did my PhD and when I went to Cambridge to do my postdoc, I was associated with one project which was sponsored by ICI, Imperial Chemical Industries then. And this particular project involved the synthesis or biosynthesis or microbial synthesis of biodegradable polymers, poly, polybutyric acid and polybutyrate. Now, these polymers are synthesized by microbes, and microbes store this synthesized polymer in within their cells. And to recover these particular polymers, it is necessary to disrupt the cells to recover the polymers. So you disrupt the cell, and then you leach out the polymers. Then that polymer is extracted, and you do the specific processing, similar processing which you do with the polymers. The reason why this particular answer is so elaborate, you will understand why I'm talking about this. So there are different methods which were followed for the disruption of these microbial cells which were loaded with the polymers. So initially, out of sheer curiosity, since I was associated with this particular project, and this entire chain of operation of biodegradable polymer synthesis, cell disruption was the most expensive or highest energy consuming operation. And being an engineer, it was necessary for me to have a look at all these processes, the processes which are followed, such as high pressure homogenizer, high speed homogenizer, French press, bead mills, so on and so forth. So I scientifically and hydrodynamically started analyzing each of these particular equipments. And to my astounding conclusion, I realized that the maximum cell disruption is occurring when all of these equipments are operating into cavitating regime, that is hydrodynamic cavitating regimes. Meaning equipment had to be run at a specific speed, at a specific fluid velocities for the cavitating conditions to get generated, and these collapsing cavities would disrupt the cells, and then this biodegradable polymer will leach out. Then, following the principles, I started looking at the fact that if at all cavitation is going to be responsible for that, are there any simpler means of generating hydrodynamic cavitation? So we did some sort of a preliminary experiment. I had a fermentation broth with these cells in it. I just circulated this particular using a pump, and downstream of the pump, I had a valve which was throttled. Now, throttling of the valve created a mechanical constriction. It increased the velocity, and as per Bernoulli's principle, increase in the velocity will reduce the pressure. Reduction in the pressure when it matches the vapor pressure of the medium, which was mostly aqueous medium, it created cavitating conditions. And you would be surprised that using only 1% of the energy which was used otherwise by other equipments, I could disrupt the cells most efficiently. That was the most exciting period. So the first was serendipitous revelation of the fact that hydrodynamic cavitation can effectively be utilized. So that prompted me to start a new area of hydrodynamic cavitation. First paper appeared in 1992 in a Washington conference, and first publication also appeared in 1992, but had a huge problem getting first paper published, mainly because nobody had done anything like that. Nobody had proposed anything like that. Nobody was willing to believe it. Nobody was willing to accept it that something like this can be done. We struggled for 8 years, and year 2000, I was chairing a conference in Italy, which was conducted by Ultrasonic Society. And I was chairing a session where Professor Detlef Losse of University of Netherlands made gave a plenary lecture. And in that plenary lecture, he showed with the photograph and analysis that even nature uses cavitation. And he showed that film of snapping shrimp in year 2000. So after 8 years of struggle, people realized the fact that if cavitation is used by nature, then it is definitely possible. Now, only objective of engineers are to create it at multiple locations and using least amount of energy. And that is how this entire research area of cavitation or hydrodynamic cavitation started.
Sir, can you give us some applications of hydrodynamic cavitation?
I missed out the question. Dhruv.
Sorry, sir. Hello.
Dhruv, I missed out the question. I couldn't get.
Sir, can you give us
Ah,
some applications
tell me.
of hydrodynamic cavitation?
Yeah. So, yeah, sure. Now, as you can see, the first work started with the disruption of cells. So the same work continued, and we also did an elaborate modeling and mathematical modeling and elaborate fluid mechanical analysis of the cavitation phenomena. So disruption of the cells to recover intracellular products was one of the area which was pursued very rigorously. Second, when we started analyzing the hydrodynamic cavitation phenomena theoretically, we realized that hydrodynamic cavitation phenomena is also capable of bringing about certain chemical changes, such as when the cavity collapses, the temperature inside the cavities reach something like 5 or 10,000 Kelvin, as a result of which the water vapor which is enclosed in this cavity, vapor cavity, gets dissociated and into H and OH. And OH being extremely strong oxidizing radicals, there are multiple applications once you know that you are producing these oxidizing radicals at will. So pollution treatment, again, if you have hydrophobic moieties which get accumulated on the collapsing cavity at the gas liquid interface, they get immediately oxidized because of the production of OH radicals happening during the process. Similarly, the shock wave which gets generated produces extremely high interfacial areas. So emulsification is also possible. So cavitation can be used for cell disruption. Cavitation can be used for effluent treatment. Cavitation can be used for increasing the interfacial area wherever the mass transfer limitations are possible. Next application, we realized that during cavitation, because of the vaporization is taking place, the solvent is getting vaporized. Now, when the solvent gets vaporized, if you have a dissolved salt in that particular solvent, you can expel the solvent in the form of small nuclei. So, for many of the crystallization operation, where external seeding or external nucleation is required, you can completely avoid the external seeding. You take this mother liquor which is saturated, you irradiate it with ultrasound or you pass it through hydrodynamic cavitating conditions, generate in situ seeds, without adding seeds externally, in situ nuclei, and then you allow the nuclei to grow, and you can have a controlled size distribution of the crystallization. Then similarly, if instead of water you have any other species in this collapsing cavity, the dissociation reactions generate number of free radicals. So many of the reactions which are based on radical based reactions, these reactions can also be carried out using cavitating conditions. The reactions can be intensified or they can be facilitated using cavitating conditions.
Thank you, sir. That is a very wonderful and interesting topic of research. And
So just to add a few, yeah. You can exploit it for many applications like this. In fact, people have attempted two things which are still in their infancy. One thing which they claim and not been proved 100%, that it is also possible for you to use cavitation for nuclear fusion, because the kind of pressures which are generated during the collapse of the cavity, it is possible that with those pressures, hundreds and thousands of bar atmospheric pressures are generated. It is possible that these pressures are capable of fusing the atoms, which can result into nuclear fusion, and you can initiate the nuclear fusion using cavitation. Another application which people are exploiting chemical engineering, that because this particular phenomena happens over an extremely small time scale where you don't allow the equilibrium to get established, it is also possible for you to break an azeotrope. So when the vapor gets formed from a mixture of a binary mixture, uh, the vapor is in equilibrium with the liquid. But if the quantity of vapor formed is so fast that you don't allow the mass transfer base or thermodynamic equilibrium to reach, then it is likely that the more solvent having more vapor pressure is likely to be enriched. And once you overcome the azeotropic limitations doing this, it is also possible for you to use this for breaking azeotrope without using an entrainer.
So it has a wide variety of applications, sir. It, yes, sir, it is very interesting.
Absolutely,
Sir, your
absolutely.
research also focuses on the use of sonochemistry and cavitation to reduce the size of particles to the nanoscale. So, do you think nanonization and nano-sized
Yeah.
products will be the next revolution in the chemical industry? And what are some advantages of using these nano-sized products?
Yeah. Um, See, the product nanotechnology, as they say, uh, uses nanoscale particle production by following two approaches, either bottom up approach or up to bottom approach or top down approach. So you start with the larger particles and then you keep on using cavitation phenomena which produces shock waves and impacts to keep on reducing cavitation to reducing particles to smaller and smaller size. Now this is called as cavitational milling, very similar to the milling operation which you study in chemical engineering. Here also, rather than using a hammer mill or bead mill, you can create a similar situations by using cavitation, and that is a top-down approach. So you start with larger particles and keep on reducing the particles to a nano size. Secondly, as I said, in case of a bottom-up approach, where the nuclei are getting generated, if you are able to control the dynamics of the cavity, you allow the nuclei gets generated, which typically has a nano size. The nuclei which gets generated during the collapse of the cavity are typically of 2 nanometer size. We can do thermodynamic calculations and you can find out this is the typical size. 2 to 8 nanometers is the size of the nuclei which gets generated. And then you allow it to grow to whatever size you want. You want 100 nanometers, 200 nanometers, 500 nanometers, like crystallization. So you need to have a control over cavitating conditions. One of the banes of cavitation conditions is being a stochastic phenomena, a random phenomena. It is extremely difficult for you to have a control over this entire operation. And to have a control over this entire operation, you need to understand the complete dynamics of the cavity, how the cavity gets generated, how it grows, how it collapses, what are the conditions under which it collapses. So once you start developing this particular understanding, you can exploit it for multiple applications. And I feel that in case of an industrial scale production of nanoparticles, cavitation is going to play a huge role for in the years to come.
Sir, what do you think are some advantages of these nano-sized products that will be manufactured in the industry?
What has been observed as far as what has been observed as far as nano size particles are concerned, that these particles significantly differ in terms of their bulk properties. So nano size particles, because of their nano size, are significantly different in terms of their physico-mechanical chemical behavior, as a result of which the bulk properties may be something else, but the same product made available in a nano form, and that too of different shape of nano sized particles, be it flat sheets, be it rods, be it spherical particles. Each of them, because of the surface effects or plasmon effects, it is possible that these particles, nano sized particles, may have different properties. So exploiting the same material for a different property, for a variety of property, is going to be the key feature of nanotechnology. It's like when you see the butterflies with beautiful colors, it is well accepted fact now that these butterflies produce these different colors, but just by changing the morphology of these nano-sized particles. So if you try to catch a butterfly at some point of time, you would have seen that the pigment on the butterfly sticks on your finger for some time, and it's extremely difficult to remove that particular pigment. And main reason for that is because these pigments are in nano-sized particles, and these nano-sized particles are capable of entering your skin. And once it enters the skin, it can again bring about different changes. In fact, all our ancient medicine involving Ayurvedic stream of treatment or homeopathic stream of treatment essentially relied on the production of nano-sized particles. If you are interested, I can send you some publications which have conclusively proved how the method which was used by our ancient Ayurvedic practitioners as well as homeopathic practitioners, and how these methods are responsible for producing nano-sized particles, and how these nano-sized particles can bring about changes in the metabolite activity or in the activity of a cell just by their sheer presence. And that is how Ayurvedic and homeopathic medicine uh, practitioners used it for treatment of the diseases or treatment of the ailments.
Thank you, sir. That is very interesting, and I did not know that such things existed, sir. Thank you. And sir, it has been observed
They do.
Sir, it has been observed that most Indian institutes of higher education have low research and innovation outputs. So, what do you think is the problem and what are the possible solutions?
Uh, it's a very good question. At the same time, it's a bit tough to answer this particular question. I'll tell you the reason for that. It's like, have you read Catch 22, a book by Joseph Heller? It's and this has become a phrase now, a catch 22, meaning what comes first, chicken or the egg, and it's very similar to that situation. What tends to happen is the funding which the institutes of higher education get depends upon the cut, what you call it as a research which is at the cutting edge. Now, research at the cutting age is essentially decided by the people who are working in that particular area who are outside India. So we tend to work in that particular area because it is a problem which has been identified by somebody from outside India, and that problem may not have any relevance as far as Indian context is concerned. But unless you do that, you don't get the funding, because the funding agencies will decide how modern the research is. There is no point in going back and reinventing the wheel, is what the general sense of perception of these people who assess this project is. As a result of which, you don't get funding for a conventional research. If you don't get funding for conventional research, there is no incentive for you to do this conventional funding. And then the whole cycle, vicious cycle continues. But it is necessary for you to generate sufficient courage after you have established yourself. So even if you look at me, I started looking at things which are of social relevance only after I established myself in terms of an expert in hydrodynamic cavitation. So I created a completely new branch of chemical engineering. And after 2000, as I said, when people accepted that hydrodynamic cavitation can be effectively utilized, from about two publications, today there are more than 1,000 publications which have appeared on that particular subject. Coming back to this is, once you realize you have established yourself, then you have time. Then whatever you say, people are going to listen to you. And whatever ridiculous it may have sounded earlier, but it doesn't sound ridiculous because it is coming from Professor Pandit, who was an FNA and FTWSA and so on and so forth. So when you have that sort of a credentials which require development, of course, which requires initial work to be carried out. Once you have that background, then you can devote your time for solving social problems. Now, you see somebody courageous enough to get into this, to change this particular deviation, that also acts as a motivation for younger people. And I think it is extremely important for every established scientist or every established academics to identify problems of relevance for our country as well as problems of social relevance, and then at least devote some fraction of his time, some percentage of time, maybe 20%, 10%, 15%, 30%, 50%, and then keep on working in this particular problems. It is not that there is no science in these problems. There is definitely a science in these particular problems. But the way you approach these particular problems sometimes in the past has not been scientific. But once you have established your scientific base and your scientific credibility, whatever you do, it is going to be based on the basic sciences. So once you follow that, I am sure Indian academia has enough talent and enough expertise to solve each of those problems. It just requires a coherent effort collectively being made by all the higher educations of higher learning.
Thank you, sir. That was very valuable guidance, sir. And sir, much of the research published today is inaccessible to the researchers, students, and the general public due to the paywalls that are set up by the publishers. So, do you think that this is a problem for the scientific
Yeah.
community? And should open access be the norm?
There is a considerable debate which is going on in this particular area. What the government is saying now, I mean, not only Indian government, but many governments, they are saying that as the research is being carried out by provided by using the funding which is provided by the government agencies, the research should be accessible to everyone. Right? We are paying for your research. We don't mind paying for the open access journal as well, because once the paper appears in the open access journal, it is accessible to everybody. Why should somebody else make money out of the research results which have been generated using money which is provided by the government? So I am expecting that 5 to 7 years time, everything will be open access journal, and the expenses which are encountered or incurred for publishing will also be inbuilt in the project funding. I was associated right from the beginning. The journal called Ultrasonic Sonochemistry. Actually, even in the first issue, volume one, number one, I have a publication in ultrasonic sonochemistry. Now, till December, this ultrasonic sonochemistry journal was a regular journal, but from January 2021, this is going to be now an open access and charge journal. So it's going to be huge charges, and I don't feel comfortable. I don't think I'll be able to contribute to this particular, though me and my group have contributed more than maybe 200 publications to this particular journal. Now, if I want to publish an article, I may have to shell out 900 to $1,500 for publishing an article. I can't afford that. But only when the government norms change and government diktats will come saying that the funding has been provided by the government, so whatever you produce should be accessible to all. I'm sure things will change and things will be for better future.
Thank you, sir. We should all hope for the best, sir. What are some things that you think ICT lacks
Yeah.
or lags in, which you would like to improve?
I think the first thing which needs to be improved is an attitude. This chalta hai attitude will not work. There is a place for jugaad, of course, but unless that jugaad is analyzed scientifically from the first principles, jugaad cannot be scaled up. So jugaad is fine to find an immediate solution to a problem when you know that you are in a position to get over the bottleneck which you are facing currently. But as a result of which you initially get away. But once you know that this solution is possible, it is necessary for you to go back and then look at that solution from a basic science point of view, and then only that solution becomes scalable and sustainable. Jugaad solutions cannot be scaled up and sustained because it is just solving an immediate problem which you encounter. So attitude chalta hai will not work, will not definitely work. Second, as I already said, that you need to choose problems or research problems which are of relevance. Right? There is always going to be, you always start your research career with the curiosity, with the inquisitiveness. You want to find out why it is this way, how it is this way, and then you learn more, and then you carry out research, and then you develop something new. Now, subsequently, you should also look at the possibility that once you have developed that critical understanding of looking at a particular phenomena, start observing your surroundings and learn from nature and learn from the society what problems require solutions and what are those problems which are there. The first is avoid chalta attitude. Second, be observant of your environment, be observant of your surroundings. And problems are not going to be listed out in books as we study books and then you try to find out the problems which have been at the end of the chapter and then we solve those problems. That is not real learning. That is a kind of a skill set which you are developing. The real learning comes when using those things which you have learned, you are able to contribute and solve a problem. Right? So be observant of your surroundings, be observant of your environment and society. Chalta hai attitude, avoidance, and these two. These are the only two basic principles which are required. And the third, which is sort of loose, not committed, is when you advance in terms of realization and understanding of science, do not forget the basics. Because what we find that when we conduct interviews for PhD admissions or for jobs, for academics as well, we know and we find that the people who have done their PhDs or people who have done their masters talk very eloquently about their research, what they have carried out during their masters or what they have carried out during their PhD. But you ask a basic fundamental question at their undergraduate level, they fumble. So it cannot be the case. There is a saying in Marathi, "Pudsa path, magcha sapat." So you learn more while learning more, you forget what the basics are. So you cannot afford to forget the basics because basics are the one which will make you think innovatively and come up with innovative products and the solutions.
Thank you, sir. That is very valuable guidance, and we should all work towards achieving those things, sir. And sir, can you please tell us about some of your current innovative projects that are underway at ICT?
I think each of each of my student is working on some projects. So what I have always done, as far as my PhD and master students are concerned, I don't impose my idea on them, because usually what tends to happen is people will come, they don't have clue in terms of what the project has to be. So I always start, I put up 3 or 4 projects which are of my interest, but I never force these projects on the students. I ask the students, are you interested in doing something? Let me see how I can help in you realizing what you are interested in finding out. Now, there are many projects which are related to cavitation, many projects related to the applications of cavitation, many projects related to the design of multi-phase reactors. And all these are essentially, maybe in some cases, incrementally additive in terms of what are the products or the processes can come about. So it's very difficult to give this short examples, but processes which are relevant are the things which I'm working on. In my opinion, each and every one is of relevance to our country. I have stopped working on problems which are esoteric in nature, blue sky research. I only think about those blue sky research. I come up with the ideas, but unless I have established one application for that blue sky research results, I don't enter into that particular field. So I always start with the basic fundamental So each of my project you will find has some social relevance attached to that. At the same time, it also has a lot of science associated with it, so that you can publish, because that publication comes depending upon the scientific contribution. At the same time, since you have decided and worked on that with an application in mind, that application also helps you to exploit that research for good of the society.
Thank you, sir. Um, Undoubtedly, you are one of the best researchers ICT has ever seen and an inspiration to many young budding researchers. So, what is some advice that you would like to give to them?
Now, I would say I'm one of the many. I mean, ICTs, Professor Sharma, Professor Joshi, Venkatraman, all these have been absolutely brilliant researchers, and they have worked under extreme, let's say, difficulties, under extreme constraints. That way, ICT is much richer as compared to what the situation was earlier. When I did my own PhD, I did not purchase a single equipment. I used to purchase equipments which were used earlier by somebody else, or do the jugaad and then develop equipments which were necessary for my own research. Today, the situation is completely different. A PhD student comes, sir, I need this. I don't want to make it. You get it from outside and you start doing your research. This situation should change, because it is killing the innovative spirit or innovative ability of the student, because that innovation is carried out by somebody else rather than you doing it with your own hands. Sitting on the computer and doing numerical simulations is good. I'm not saying that it is bad, but ultimately that needs to be validated by hard experiments. And these hard experiments also, you need to learn how you are going to fabricate a setup, how you are going to put up a setup, how you are going to run a setup, how you are going to modify the setup, how you are going to change the setup. And these innovations you will only arrive at only when you are doing hands-on, or you're developing these hands-on experience to run these setups.
Thanks a lot, sir, for that valuable advice, sir. And it was a real pleasure talking to you, sir. And your answers will definitely prove to be an inspiration to many students and help them in nurturing a brighter future. Uh, I thank you once again.
I sincerely hope so. I sincerely hope so, and many thanks for giving me an opportunity to talk to you all people, and at least try to answer some of the doubts and the questions which every student has in terms of what is my ultimate objective in life. What do I want to achieve in life? Somebody did ask me the same question a few years ago. As a teacher, what is your aim? And it made me think. And my simplest answer then came out after 2 days of thinking. I said that I want to generate a sufficient manpower of students who will contribute not less than 20,000 crores to the GDP of India. Full stop. I didn't have any other objective or motivation in my mind as far as my contribution to academics or country is concerned.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. On behalf of the entire BT team.
My pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you again. Thanks for giving me an opportunity to talk to you all. Thank you very much and all the very best. And whatever little advice which I have given and my experiences which I have shared, I hope you learn something out of it and you practice it in your life as well. Thank you.
Definitely, sir. Definitely.